We trust the ground beneath our feet. We look at the cliffs, the mountains, and the layers of stone in a canyon, and we see a record. We see a history book that has been written without interruption, layer by layer, page by page, since the beginning of the world. But this is an illusion. The Book of Earth is not complete. It is a damaged manuscript. If you know where to look, you can find places where the story simply stops. Places where the narrative of our planet has been violently interrupted. There is a phenomenon found in the bedrock of continents all over the globe. It is a line in the stone where two different worlds meet. Below the line, there is ancient, lifeless rock. Above the line, there is a world teeming with complex life. But between them, in the thin, invisible boundary that separates them, there is nothing. Not a layer of sediment, not a layer of ash, just a void. We are not talking about a missing century. We are talking about a missing eternity. In some places, this gap represents over 1 billion years of lost time. 1 billion years of history, mountains rising and falling, oceans opening and closing, perhaps entire evolutionary experiments, simply erased from the record. Where did it go? How does a planet simply lose a quarter of its memory? And what happened in that lost eon that changed the world from a barren rock into the home of complex life? Tonight, we stand on the edge of the Great Unconformity. We are going to investigate the planet's greatest case of amnesia. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who is joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. To understand the scale of this mystery, we must go to the one place on Earth where time is laid bare. We must travel to the bottom of the Grand Canyon. Imagine you are hiking down. You descend past the red limestone cliffs, past the layers of fossilized seabeds, going deeper and deeper into the crust of the Earth. You are walking backward through time. Eventually you reach the very bottom, near the banks of the Colorado River, in a place known as Blacktail Canyon. Here you can walk up to a cliff face and do something that should be impossible. You can place your hand on a single thin line in the rock. If you place your finger on this line, you are touching a boundary that defies logic. The rock just under your thumb is a dark, twisted, vertical stone called the Vishnu schist. It is ancient. It was forged in the heart of a mountain range that no longer exists, roughly 1.7 billion years ago. The rock just above your thumb is different. It is a flat, horizontal layer of sandstone called the Tapeats sandstone. It was laid down in a shallow tropical sea about 500 million years ago. Your thumb is covering the gap. The distance between the two rocks is 0. They are fused together in a solid, unbroken block, but the distance in time between them is 1.2 billion years. Pause for a moment and try to hold that number in your mind. 1.2 billion years. That is longer than the existence of dinosaurs. It is longer than the existence of trees. It is longer than the existence of complex animal life. It is roughly 1/4 of the entire history of the planet Earth, and it is gone. There is no debris between the layers. There is no rubble. Just a clean, sharp line where one world ends and another, vastly younger world begins. It creates a feeling of vertigo. It is like reading a biography of a person, reading about their birth, and then turning the page to find them on their deathbed, with absolutely no record of the 80 years lived in between. This line is not just a curiosity of the Grand Canyon. As geologists fanned out across the globe, they found this same impossible line everywhere. They found it in the seaside cliffs of Scotland, They found it under the ice of Antarctica. They found it in the deserts of Arabia and the tundras of Siberia. It is a global phenomenon, a planetary eraser that seems to have wiped the surface of the Earth clean, removing the evidence of 1 billion years, leaving behind only this haunting, silent, and inexplicably sharp line in the stone. Tonight, we are going to trace that line. We are going to ask, what could possibly possess the power to carve 1 billion years out of the geological record? And we will ask what was happening on Earth during that lost aeon. What kind of world was hiding in the gap? To grasp the magnitude of this void, we must first understand how the Earth writes its own history. Geologists have long used the metaphor of a book. It is an apt comparison. The Earth is a chronicler. It records the passage of time in layers of sediment. Every grain of sand washing down a river, every particle of dust settling on a lake bed, every shell sinking to the ocean floor is a character in a sentence. Over millions of years, these grains are compressed into stone, forming the pages of the geological record. Stratigraphy is simply the act of reading these pages, starting from the bottom and working our way up to the present. In a perfect world, this book would be complete. We would be able to read the history of the planet from the first cooled crust to the asphalt of our modern cities without interruption. But the Book of Earth is not kept in a library. It is kept in a violent, restless, and destructive physical world. Pages are torn out. Chapters are missing. This is common. A river might change its course and scour away a few thousand years of mud. A storm might strip a coastline. Geologists call these gaps unconformities. They are hiccups in the narrative, brief moments where the recording stopped or was erased. But the gap we are facing here, the one under the Tapetes sandstone, is not a hiccup. It is as if you opened a history of the world, read the chapter on the formation of the continents, turned the page, and found yourself in the middle of the Roman Empire. The entire middle of the story, the evolution of the atmosphere, the first experiments with life, the shifting of the great landmasses, has been ripped out. This suggests something terrifying. It implies that the Earth did not simply stop writing. The recording did not just pause. For this gap to exist, the rock that was there, the kilometers of stone that represented that missing billion years, must have been actively destroyed. It must have been ground down, pulverized, and removed. We are looking at a planetary scale erasure. It forces us to ask a question that geology struggles to answer. What kind of force is capable of unwriting history on such a massive scale? If sediment is the memory of the planet, then the Great Unconformity is a lobotomy. It is a violence done to the record. And as scientists began to compare notes, as they looked beyond the canyon walls of Arizona, they realized that this violence was not a local accident. It was not a freak event confined to one continent. The eraser had touched almost everywhere. The Grand Canyon is a spectacle. It is easy to stand on its rim, look down at that missing line of time, and assume it is just another unique feature of a unique landscape, a local quirk of the Colorado River. But geology is a science of patterns, and as scientists began to look closer at the bedrock of other continents, they found the same impossible scar staring back at them. They found it on the windswept coast of Scotland, at a place called Sychar Point. Here, in the 18th century, the father of geology, James Hutton, first stared at the gap. He saw vertical grey rocks from the deep past, capped by horizontal red sandstone from a much younger world, and he realized he was looking into an abyss of time. But it did not stop in Scotland. Geologists found the gap deep beneath the ice of Antarctica. They found it buried under the burning sands of the Arabian Peninsula. They found it in the frozen tundra of Siberia and in the heart of the Amazon. Across the globe, the ancient cores of the continents, the cratons, seem to have suffered the same trauma. The rock record of the Neo-Proterozoic era, the time roughly between 1 billion and 540 million years ago, is missing almost everywhere. It is a conspiracy of silence. This tells us that whatever caused this erasure was not a local river changing course. It was not a single mountain range rising or falling. It was a planetary event. Something happened to the Earth that affected the entire globe simultaneously. A force so pervasive, so total, that it managed to peel the surface off the continents from pole to pole. We are looking at a synchronized global memory loss. The Earth blinked, and when it opened its eyes, 1 billion years had passed. To understand the violence of this erasure, we have to try to reconstruct the victim. We have to look into the void and ask, what was the Earth like during those missing years? What kind of world was erased? The answer is a time that scientists have given a deceptive, almost mocking nickname. They call it the boring billion. But as we are about to see, it was anything but boring. It was an alien planet. The phrase 1 billion years slips easily off the tongue. It is just a number, a 1 followed by 9 zeros. But to the human mind, which struggles to truly comprehend a single century, 1 billion years is not a unit of time. It is an abstraction. It is an eternity. Let us try to weigh it. Consider the dinosaurs, the Tyrannosaurus, the Triceratops, the great sauropods. Their empire was vast. They ruled the Earth for 160 million years. To us, that seems unending, but the gap in the stone is 6 times longer than the entire reign of the dinosaurs. Consider the history of complex life, from the first fish to crawl onto land, to the rise of the forests, to the birds, the whales, and finally, to us. The entire story of animals on Earth spans roughly 600 million years. The gap is double that. It is a void so vast that you could fit the entire history of animal life inside it, twice over, and still have room for a few million years of silence. In 1 billion years, a mountain range as high as the Himalayas could rise from a flat plain, pierce the sky, and be eroded down to nothing but flat sand, 20 times over. Oceans could open, widen to the size of the Atlantic, and then close again, crushed between colliding continents. This is the scale of the missing pages. We are not talking about a missing scene from a movie. We are talking about half the film reel being cut out and thrown into the fire. The Earth we see today, the Earth of biology and noise, is just the thin skin on top of this deep, silent abyss. But this abyss was not empty. The Earth did not cease to exist during that lost billion years. It was there. It was spinning. It was orbiting the sun. So, what was it doing? If we could look into that void, if we could travel back to the time that the rocks refused to record, what would we see? We would see a planet that feels recognizable, yet fundamentally wrong. An alien world masquerading as our own. A world trapped in a strange, suffocating stability. Geologists have given this lost era a nickname. They call it the boring billion. It is a name born of frustration. In the rock record that does exist from this time, very little seems to happen. There are no rapid shifts in carbon isotopes, no sudden explosions of life, no dramatic swings in climate. It appears to be a time of eerie, stagnant stability. But boring is the wrong word. If you were to step out of a time machine and onto the surface of the Earth 1.5 billion years ago, you would not be bored. You would be terrified. You would be standing on an alien planet. The first thing you would notice is the vertigo. The rhythm of the world is wrong. The Earth is spinning faster, much faster. The drag of the tides has not yet slowed the planet down to our familiar 24-hour cadence. A day on this Earth lasts only about 18 or 19 hours. The sun rushes across the sky. The winds, driven by this rapid rotation, are fierce and constant, scouring the barren, lifeless continents with high-velocity dust storms. And when the night falls, the sky is dominated by a monster. The moon is closer, much closer. It hangs in the sky, a looming cratered disk, far larger and brighter than the moon we know. And its gravity is oppressive. As it orbits, it drags the oceans with it, creating tides of immense power, stripping the coastlines bare twice a day with a violence we can scarcely imagine. But it is the oceans themselves that would stop your heart. They are not blue. For 1 billion years, the chemistry of the seas was locked in a strange, toxic state known as the Canfield Ocean. The deep water was stripped of oxygen and saturated with hydrogen sulfide, the gas that smells of rotten eggs. This chemical mix likely turned the water a murky, vibrant purple, or perhaps a dull, toxic green, teeming with sulfur-loving bacteria. Imagine standing on a shore of bare grey rock with no moss, no grass, no life to soften the landscape. You are watching a purple tide rush out under a giant moon, while the air smells of sulfur and the wind howls over a planet that is spinning too fast. This is the world that was erased. It was a world of geochemical stasis, a planetary deadlock. The low oxygen levels kept life simple. The simple life couldn't produce enough oxygen to change the atmosphere. It was a trap, a stable, suffocating billion-year-long trap. And in this trap, life did exist. But it was not the life of animals, or plants, or fungi. It was a different kind of empire. An empire of slime. In this purple, sulphurous ocean, there were no fish. There were no crabs scuttling on the sand. There were no jellyfish pulsing in the currents. If you looked into the water, you would see only one thing: a carpet. A thick, gelatinous and living skin that covered the bottom of the shallow seas. This was the empire of the microbial mat. For 1 billion years, the highest form of life on Earth was a layer of bacteria and algae, glued together by a secretion of mucus. It coated the rocks. It coated the sand. In some places, it built upward, layer by sticky layer, creating rocky mounds called stromatolites. These were the skyscrapers of the boring billion, silent stone pillars built by single-celled architects. This world was defined by what it lacked. There were no grazers. Nothing existed to eat the mats. They simply grew, died and were buried, undisturbed by any mouth or claw. There were no burrowers. The sea floor was sealed shut. The sediment layers were pristine, flat and perfectly horizontal, because nothing existed that could dig into the mud and mix the nutrients. And crucially, there were no hunters. It was a world without fear. A world without eyes. A world without the concept of enemy. It was a garden of slime, frozen in a state of evolutionary paralysis. Because the ocean was choked with hydrogen sulfide and starved of oxygen, complex animals could not evolve. To build a brain, a heart, or a muscle, you need high-energy fuel. You need oxygen. Without it, life hit a glass ceiling. It was trapped in the microscopic. So, for 1 billion years, the Earth simply waited. The sun rose and set on a slimy, silent, and unchanging world. Evolution was idling. The engine was running, but the gears were in neutral. This is what makes the Great Unconformity so shocking. It was not just a geological event, it was a regime change. Something happened that didn't just erase the rocks of this period. It shattered the stagnation. It broke the billion-year tyranny of the slime and paved the way for the monsters and the miracles that followed. But before we can understand the awakening, we must solve the mystery of the erasure. What force could be powerful enough to scour this stable, ancient world down to the bone? The investigation turns now to the suspects, and the first clue lies in the movement of the continents themselves. To solve the mystery of the missing billion years, we must first understand the logic of the stone itself. We must understand how the Earth keeps time. The planet has two opposing modes of existence. It is either writing history, or it is destroying it. The writing mode is called sedimentation. This happens in the low places of the world, in the deep oceans, the shallow seas, and the sinking basins. Here, gravity does the work. Dust, sand, and the skeletons of tiny creatures drift down and settle. Layer upon layer, millennium upon millennium, the weight builds. The pressure turns the mud into shale, the sand into sandstone, the shells into limestone. This is how the book is written. As long as the land is low and covered by water, the recording light is on. But there is another mode, the erasing mode. This is called erosion. This happens in the high places. When the crust of the Earth is pushed up, when mountains rise and continents are lifted above the sea, the recording stops. The sediment can no longer settle because gravity pulls it away. And then the elements attack. Rain, wind, ice, and chemical weathering begin to chew on the rock. They break it down. They grind the mountains back into dust and wash that dust into the sea. This is the key to the Great Unconformity. For a gap this huge to exist, the Earth had to switch modes on a global scale. It suggests that for a billion years, the continents were lifted high. They were pushed up, exposed to the fury of the atmosphere, and stripped bare. The recording light was turned off. But simply stopping the recording is not enough. If you stop writing in a diary, you have blank pages. You do not lose the pages you have already written. The Great Unconformity is not just a lack of new rock, it represents the destruction of old rock. Kilometers of vertical stone that had already been written, already solidified, were scoured away. So our investigation leads to a terrifying question. What force could lift the continents so high for so long that the weather could eat a billion years of history? The first suspect is a supercontinent, a landmass so vast and so hot that it literally lifted itself out of the sea to escape its own internal fire. We often speak of Pangaea, the famous supercontinent of the dinosaurs. But Pangaea was not the first, it was merely the latest in a long rhythmic cycle of assembly and breakup. Long before Pangaea, a billion years ago, all the land masses of the Earth crunched together to form a different titan. Its name was Rodinia. It was a desolate, barren supercontinent, sitting alone in the vast global ocean. And its formation provides us with our first major suspect in the case of the missing time. The assembly of a supercontinent has a strange thermal side effect. Continental crust is thick. It acts like a giant insulating blanket thrown over the hot interior of the planet. When all the continents cluster together, they trap the heat of the mantle beneath them. The heat builds up. It has nowhere to escape. The molten rock below begins to expand, to swell with thermal energy. And this swelling pushes the continent up. Rodinia was lifted. The entire landmass was heaved upward by the superheated mantle below, rising perhaps kilometers above sea level. This was the Great Lift. As the continent rose, the shallow seas that usually cover the edges of the land, the places where the sediment accumulates, where history is written, drained away. The protective water retreated. The continent was left exposed, naked. For hundreds of millions of years, Rodinia stood high and dry, subjected to the relentless attack of the wind and the rain. The elements gnawed at its surface. They stripped away the upper layers of rock, the pages of history that had just been written, and washed them into the deep ocean trenches where they were destroyed by subduction. This is a compelling theory, a supercontinent that lifts itself up to be erased. But there is a problem. Rain and wind are powerful, but they are slow. They are gentle erasers. They can strip away a mountain range given enough time, but can they scour the entire globe? Can they account for the sheer uniform sharpness of the line we see in the Grand Canyon? Many scientists believe that Rodinia was just the setup. It lifted the rock up, yes. It made the victim vulnerable. But the true erasure, the violence that carved 1 billion years out of the planet, required a tool much harder, much heavier, and much more destructive than rain. It required a bulldozer. And just as Rodinia began to break apart, the climate tipped. The trap was sprung. The planet didn't just get cold, it shattered the thermostat completely. The uplift of Rodinia was the setup, but the erasure required a weapon. About 717 million years ago, the climate system of the Earth suffered a catastrophic failure. The breakup of the supercontinent had unleashed a complex chain of events. Volcanic weathering that sucked carbon dioxide from the air, changes in the reflectivity of the planet that sent the temperature plummeting. The ice caps at the poles began to grow. They marched toward the equator. Normally, the Earth has a safety mechanism to stop this, but this time the feedback loop was broken. The ice reflected the sun, cooling the planet, which made more ice, which reflected more sun. It was a runaway freeze. The ice crossed the critical latitude of 30 degrees, and then it snapped shut. The glaciers met at the equator. The entire planet, from pole to pole, was encased in a solid shell of ice. This was Snowball Earth. It is a climate state so extreme it sounds like science fiction. The average global temperature fell to -50 degrees Celsius. The oceans were sealed under a kilometer of ice. The hydrological cycle, the evaporation of water and the falling of rain, shut down. The planet was a white, silent, and frozen tomb floating in space. But this was not a static tomb. The ice was not still. Glaciers are not just frozen water. They are solids that flow. Driven by gravity, the immense weight of the ice sheets caused them to slide, grind, and churn across the continents. And because the entire planet was frozen, these were not local mountain glaciers. These were continent-spanning sheets, kilometers thick, moving with the unstoppable force of a tectonic plate. And beneath them, the rock screamed. The ice acted like a file. It acted like a belt sander on a planetary scale. It gripped the surface of the continents, the surface that Rodinia had already lifted up, and it began to scour. It did not just remove the soil, it bit into the bedrock. For millions of years, as the Snowball Earth thawed and refroze in a series of pulses, this glacial bulldozer scraped the continents raw. It ground down the mountains. It peeled away the crust. It carved out the 1 billion years. This is the Great Unconformity. It is not a mystery of missing time. It is the scar left by the greatest excavation project in history. The ice shaved the planet clean. But this leads to a new question, a problem of physics. Matter cannot be destroyed. If the glaciers scraped off 1 billion years worth of continental crust, turning mountains into dust, where did all that dust go? The answer lies in the deep ocean, and that dust, that lost 1 billion years, was about to become the most valuable substance on Earth. We often mistake ice for a preservative. We put food in the freezer to keep it safe, to stop time. But on a planetary scale, ice is not a preservative. It is a destroyer. The glaciers that covered the Earth during the Snowball event were not static sheets of white. They were dynamic, heavy, and relentless rivers of solid matter. Driven by the crushing weight of accumulation at the poles, they flowed toward the equator. And as they moved, they engaged in a process geologists call plucking and abrasion. The bottom of a glacier is not smooth. It is studded with rocks, boulders, and debris. that it has picked up along the way. It acts exactly like a piece of sandpaper. But in this case, the sandpaper is thousands of kilometers wide, and the hand pressing it down weighs billions of tons. This was the Great Scouring. As the ice sheets slid over the continents of Rodinia, they did not just polish the surface. They bit deep. They tore into the crust. The friction was immense. The heat generated at the base of the glaciers melted the ice just enough to lubricate the destruction, allowing the great white sheets to slide faster, cutting deeper. They sheared off the tops of mountain ranges. They gouged out basins that would later become inland seas. They stripped away the soil, the sediment, and the rock beneath it. Geologists estimate that in some places, the glaciers removed a vertical layer of rock 3 to 5 kilometers thick. Think about what that means. 3 kilometers of vertical stone. That is not just a layer of dirt. That is the entire geological record of an aeon. That 3-kilometer slice contained the fossilized riverbeds of the ancient world. It contained the volcanic ash layers that marked the passage of time. It contained the evidence of the boring billion. The ice took it all. It ground the history of the planet into a fine white powder known as glacial flour. The Great Unconformity is not a mystery of disappearance. It is the aftermath of a planetary sanding. The missing pages of the book were not torn out. They were shredded, pulverized, and turned into dust. This explains the line. It explains the sharpness. The reason the contact point in the Grand Canyon is so clean is that the ice scoured it flat before the new sediment was laid down. But this act of destruction created a new problem. A problem of mass. You cannot simply make 3 kilometers of continental crust vanish. You can change its form, you can turn rock into flour, but the matter must go somewhere. As the Snowball Earth finally began to melt, as the glaciers retreated in a catastrophic global thaw, they released their hostage. They flushed 1 billion years of history into the only place left to go. They dumped it into the ocean. Physics is strict. The law of conservation of mass allows for no loopholes. Matter cannot be created or destroyed. It can only change form. If the glaciers scraped away 3 kilometers of vertical rock from the continents, that rock did not vanish into the ether. It had to go somewhere. So, where is the missing billion years? Where is the rubble of the boring billion? We find the answer in the melt. When the Snowball Earth finally ended, it did not end quietly. The thaw was catastrophic. As the atmosphere warmed, the glaciers that had held the continents in a vice grip began to collapse. They unleashed meltwater floods of biblical proportions. These were not clear mountain streams. They were thick, opaque rivers of sludge. They were choked with the glacial flour, the pulverized remains of the ancient crust. This slurry poured off the continents in a global torrent. It rushed down the continental slopes and settled into the deep ocean basins. Geologists have found this layer. They call it the Great Sediment Anomaly. Lying on top of the ancient ocean crust, there is a massive, unprecedented spike in sedimentation rates dating exactly to this period. It is a colossal blanket of mud, miles thick in places, that buried the sea floor. This mud is the missing book. If you could dredge up a handful of this ancient sediment, you would be holding the dust of the lost mountains. You would be holding the pulverized remains of the first riverbeds. You would be holding the ground that the first life forms might have lived on. The history was not stolen, it was relocated. The continents were scrubbed clean, leaving behind the fresh, raw surface we see in the Grand Canyon. And the debris, the billion years of memory, was dumped into the ocean. But this was not just a relocation of dirt, this was a chemical bomb. By dumping that much raw, ground-up rock into the water, The glaciers were about to inadvertently perform the greatest chemistry experiment in the history of the planet. They were about to change the recipe of the ocean itself. When you pour acid onto limestone, it fizzes. It is a violent, immediate chemical reaction. The event that followed the Great Melt was similar, but on a scale that challenges the imagination. The glacial flour, that fine white powder of pulverized continents, was not inert dust. It was raw, unweathered rock. It was rich in minerals: calcium, magnesium, phosphate, bicarbonate. For 1 billion years, these minerals had been locked away in the mountains, but now, ground into microscopic particles and dumped into the sea, they were chemically active. They were ready to react. As this mineral slurry mixed with the ocean water, which was saturated with carbon dioxide, a global chemical reaction began. It changed the taste of the ocean. For eons, the oceans of the boring billion had been relatively acidic. It was a chemistry that made it very difficult for minerals to form solid structures. If a creature tried to build a shell in those waters, the ocean would simply dissolve it back into nothingness. But the glacial flour changed the recipe. It acted like a planetary dose of antacid. The massive influx of ions neutralized the acidity. It flooded the water with calcium carbonate. It turned the global ocean into hard water. The sea became supersaturated. It became thick with the building blocks of matter. It was no longer a solvent that dissolved things. It was a solution waiting to precipitate things. This was the Great Alkalinity Crisis. But crisis is the wrong word. It was an injection. The glaciers had inadvertently fertilized the world. They had dumped 1 billion years' worth of nutrients, intended for 1 billion years of slow release, into the water all at once. The ocean was now a battery, fully charged. It was a pantry stocked to the ceiling with the raw materials of construction: calcium for bones, phosphate for DNA, carbonate for shells. The stage was no longer empty, it was set. The chemistry of the water had been fundamentally rewritten by the destruction of the land. And in this new, mineral-rich, supersaturated ocean, life, which had been soft, squishy, and vulnerable for 3 billion years, finally found the tools it needed to build a fortress. There is a profound irony at the heart of this mystery. We look at the Great Unconformity as a loss. We see the missing billion years, the erased mountains, the pulverized history, and we feel a sense of tragedy. We mourn the lost pages of the book, but from the perspective of the planet, this destruction was not a tragedy, it was a necessity. This is the paradox of destruction. In the economy of the Earth, nothing comes from nothing. To build something new, something old must be torn down. For 3 billion years, the Earth had been hoarding its wealth. The continents held the calcium, the mountains held the phosphate. Life was starving in the oceans because the nutrients were locked away in the stone fortresses of the land. The glaciers were the key that unlocked the vault. By scraping the continents down to the bone, the ice liberated the raw materials of life. It took the stagnant, hoarded wealth of the boring billion and redistributed it to the world. If the Great Unconformity had not happened, if the glaciers had not erased that history, the oceans would have remained acidic. They would have remained chemically hostile. Life would have remained soft, simple, and microscopic. The slime empire would have continued to rule. We often think of stability as good and catastrophe as bad. But in this case, stability was a prison. The boring billion was a time of peace, but it was a piece of stagnation. The catastrophe, the Snowball Earth, the grinding ice, the massive erosion, was the catalyst. It broke the deadlock. The erasure of the past was the down payment on the future. The Earth had to destroy its own memory to make room for what was coming next. And what came next was us, or rather, the very first draft of us. The timing is too perfect to be a coincidence. The moment the Great Unconformity ends, the moment the erosion stops and the new sediment begins to settle, the world changes instantly. The silence creates a sound. The darkness creates an eye. The soft creates a shell. The glaciers retreated. The grinding stopped. The great planetary eraser was lifted, and in the geological record, right on top of that sharp line, right above the missing billion years, something miraculous happens. The rock is no longer empty. It is crowded. In a geological heartbeat, perhaps just 20 million years, a blink of an eye compared to the vast silence that came before, life exploded. This was the Cambrian explosion. It was not a gradual evolution. It was a biological Big Bang. For 3 billion years, life had been microscopic, soft and blind. And then, suddenly, life woke up. It grew legs, it grew armor, it grew teeth, and most terrifyingly, it grew eyes. The ocean, once a silent mat of slime, became a chaotic, three-dimensional battlefield. Strange, alien creatures filled the water. Anomalocaris, the first super-predator, a meter-long nightmare with grasping claws and a mouth like a camera shutter, cruised the currents. Trilobites, scuttling like armored tanks, claimed the seafloor. Opabinia, with its 5 eyes and vacuum cleaner nozzle, hunted in the sediment. Every major body plan of every animal alive today, from the arthropods to the mollusks, to the very first ancestors of the vertebrates, appeared in this single, frantic window of time. It was a frenzy of innovation. Evolution was no longer idling, it was racing. The question that has haunted science for a century is, why? Why then? Why did life wait 3 billion years to do this, and then do it all at once? Darwin himself was troubled by this. He saw it as a challenge to his theory of gradual change. But the Great Unconformity offers the answer. The explosion did not happen despite the missing time. It happened because of it. The timing is precise. The Cambrian explosion sits directly on top of the Great Unconformity. They are physically touching in the rock record. The spark that ignited this explosion was not a random genetic mutation. It was the chemical legacy of the destruction. The glaciers had destroyed the old world to build the new one. They had turned the ocean into a construction site, piled high with the raw materials needed to build a new kind of life. Life finally had the bricks. Now, it just needed to learn how to build the wall. The explosion of life was not just about behavior. It was about architecture. For billions of years, life was soft. It was squishy. It was made of jelly and membrane. If you were to touch a creature from the boring billion, it would offer no resistance. It had no structure to hold it up against gravity, no shield to protect it from a bite. But in the Cambrian, life hardened. This is the great biomineralization event. Suddenly, simultaneously and independently, dozens of different groups of animals figured out how to turn the water around them into stone. They built shells. They built spines. They built exoskeletons. They invented the concept of the bone. This was a monumental leap in engineering. Building a skeleton requires an immense amount of energy, but more importantly, it requires raw materials. You need calcium, you need carbonate, you need phosphate, and in the old oceans, these materials were scarce. The chemistry was wrong. Trying to build a shell in the acidic waters of the Proterozoic was like trying to build a sandcastle in a hurricane. The water would dissolve it faster than you could build it. But the Great Unconformity changed the math. The glacial flour, that slurry of pulverized rock from the missing billion years, had flooded the oceans with ions. It had raised the alkalinity. It had turned the ocean into a supersaturated solution of construction materials. The water was no longer an enemy to the shell, it was a partner. The animals did not just evolve shells because they wanted protection. They evolved shells because the ocean effectively forced the minerals upon them. They had to do something with all that calcium entering their bodies. So they secreted it, they organized it, they turned a chemical problem into a structural solution. This is the direct physical link between the missing time and our own existence. The calcium in your bones right now, the phosphate in your DNA, these atoms did not come from nowhere. They were likely locked away in the granite peaks of Rodinia for 1 billion years. It was the destruction of that ancient world, the grinding of those lost mountains by the ice, that released these atoms. The dust of the missing billion years became the mortar for the first skeletons. The past was not just erased, it was repurposed. It was recycled into the armor of the first trilobite and the teeth of the first predator. Life needs more than just armor. A tank is useless without an engine, and an engine is useless without fuel. The Cambrian explosion was not just an architectural revolution, it was an energetic one. Creatures were suddenly swimming, hunting, burrowing, and fighting. This high-energy lifestyle requires a massive amount of fuel, and the most critical ingredient for this fuel, the limiting factor for all life on Earth, is phosphorus. Phosphorus is the battery of biology. It is the backbone of DNA. It is the key component of ATP, the molecule that stores energy in every single one of your cells. Without phosphorus, life remains small, slow, and simple. For the boring billion, phosphorus was locked away. It was trapped in the continental rocks, hoarded by the land. The oceans were starving for it. But the Great Unconformity broke the lock. When the glaciers ground the continents into flour and dumped that dust into the sea, they unleashed a phosphorus bomb. They flooded the global ocean with 1 billion years' worth of stockpiled fertilizer. The reaction was immediate. The microscopic plants of the ocean, the phytoplankton, feasted. Their populations exploded on a scale never seen before or since. They turned the sun's energy into food at a frantic pace. And this abundance of food allowed animals to get big. It allowed them to evolve complex food webs. It allowed the first predators to evolve because there was finally enough energy in the system to support them. So when we look at a trilobite, or an ancient fish, or even ourselves, we are witnessing a form of recycling on a cosmic scale. The energy that powers our bodies, the atoms that make up our genetic code, are fueled by the nutrients released from that destroyed history. We are quite literally eating the past. The lost billion years did not just disappear. It was digested. It was transformed from cold, dead stone into the warm, vibrant, and violent dance of complex life. The erasure of the geological record was the necessary sacrifice to feed the biological one. But this leads to a darker question. If this erasure happened once, could it have happened before? Is the Great Unconformity a unique event, or is it part of a cycle? Are there other empty pages in the Book of Earth that we have simply failed to notice? The Great Unconformity is the deepest scar in the rock record. 1 billion years is a staggering amount of time to lose. But once geologists learned to recognize the signature of erasure, they began to see it elsewhere. They realized that the Great Unconformity is not a unique accident. It is simply the loudest silence in a book full of missing pages. The Earth, it seems, is a serial offender. Geology is governed by a rhythm known as the Wilson cycle. It is the heartbeat of plate tectonics. Continents drift apart, ocean basins open, sediments accumulate, and history is written. This is the phase of memory. But then the cycle turns. The oceans close. The continents crash back together to form a supercontinent. The land is lifted up. the erosion begins, and history is erased. This is the phase of forgetting. We see evidence of other, smaller gaps throughout the deep past. There are unconformities associated with the formation of Pangaea and with older shadow continents like Nuna and Columbia. Each time a supercontinent forms, it acts like a planetary reset button. It lifts the archives of the previous age into the sky, allowing the wind and rain to scrub them away. This suggests a haunting possibility. We assume that the history of Earth is a linear story, a steady progression from simple to complex. But what if the record is biased? What if the Earth only keeps the records of the quiet times, the times when the continents are drifting apart and the basins are sinking? And what if it systematically destroys the records of the violent times, the times of assembly and uplift? We are reading a history book where every third chapter has been ripped out by the author. We see the beginning of an era and the end, but the middle is often just a line in the sand. The Great Unconformity is special only because of its scale. It was the result of a perfect storm, a supercontinent and a snowball Earth that created the ultimate eraser. But the process itself is fundamental. The Earth is a forgetful narrator. It builds mountains only to destroy them. It writes history only to grind it into dust. And this leads us to the most speculative and perhaps the most unsettling question of all. If the record is so incomplete, what exactly are we missing? We construct our understanding of the past based on what we find. We find shells. We find bones. We find teeth. We assume that the history of life is the history of hard things. But this is a bias. It is the bias of survival. We know that for the first 3 billion years, life was soft. It had no skeleton. And soft tissue does not fossilize. It rots. Unless it is buried instantly in very specific conditions, it leaves no trace. So, when 1 billion years of rock is erased, we lose more than just geology. We lose the possibility of knowing what else might have tried to live on this planet. What if the boring billion was not boring? What if, in those vanished shallow seas, there were other experiments, other attempts at complexity that simply never developed the hard parts necessary to write their names in stone? Perhaps there were vast empires of soft-bodied creatures, complex algae, or strange gelatinous forms that thrived for millions of years, only to be wiped out by the glacial scouring, leaving not a single fossil behind. Perhaps evolution revved its engine more than once. We see the Ediacaran biota, those strange quilted mattresses, appearing just after the glaciers retreated. But were they the first? Or were they simply the first lucky enough to be preserved in the new sediment? The gap invites us to wonder. It suggests that our history might be full of ghost lineages, entire branches of the tree of life that grew, flourished, and were pruned away without leaving a single leaf for us to find. We are proud of our lineage because we are the ones who survived. We are the ones with the bones. But in the deep silence of the Great Unconformity, there is room for 1,000 other stories that were written in water and erased by ice. We see the timeline as a straight arrow leading to us. But maybe it is not an arrow. Maybe it is a series of broken lines, a stuttering, halting journey where continuity is an illusion. Humans are storytelling creatures. We crave narrative. We look for a beginning, a middle, and an end. We look at the history of the Earth, and we instinctively draw a straight line connecting the past to the present. We see the fish, then the amphibian, then the reptile, then the mammal, and finally, us. It feels like a ladder, a steady, unbroken ascent towards complexity. But the Great Unconformity shatters this ladder. It reveals that the line we draw is an illusion. The history of the Earth is not a continuous film. It is a series of snapshots. It is a strobe light flashing in a dark room. We see a moment of clarity, a sediment layer rich in fossils, and then the light goes out. For 1,000,000 years or 1,000,000,000 years, there is darkness, erosion, silence. And then the light flashes again, revealing a world that has completely changed. We connect these flashes in our minds. We fill in the blanks with our imagination. We assume that the darkness was just a bridge between the light. But what if the darkness is the main event? The Great Unconformity teaches us that the normal state of the Earth's crust is often destruction, not preservation. The moments where history is actually written are rare, special, and fleeting. We are living on an archipelago of time. We stand on small islands of preserved history, separated by vast oceans of missing time. This realization is humbling. It means that our understanding of the planet is built on a fraction of the data. We are trying to reconstruct a masterpiece painting from a handful of shredded canvas scraps. The continuity we see is a trick of the light. It is a bias of our own minds, desperate to see order in the chaos. But the rocks tell a different truth. They tell us that history is jagged. It is interrupted. It is a story that has been edited by a violent and forgetful editor, and this editor is not finished. The process of erasure did not stop with the Cambrian. It is happening right now. This brings us to the final and perhaps most personal question of our journey. If the Earth is a machine that deletes history, what will happen to us? We look at our cities, our skyscrapers of steel and glass, our highways of concrete, and we feel a sense of permanence. We feel that we are carving a deep, indelible mark into the face of the planet. We have named our time the Anthropocene, the human epoch. We are currently writing a frantic, dense, and chemical page in the book of Earth. We are laying down a layer of techno-fossils, plastics, rare earth metals, concrete, and the radioactive isotopes from our atomic tests. But the lesson of the Great Unconformity is a humbling one. It teaches us that writing the page is not enough. The page must survive the editing room, and geology is a ruthless editor. Consider where we have built our civilization. We have built our greatest monuments on the continents, high above the sea. We live in the zone of erosion. Every rainstorm that washes dust from a building, every wind that scours a highway is an act of slow erasure. We are fighting a losing battle against the elements. If human civilization were to end tomorrow, the process of dismantling would begin immediately. The steel would rust, the concrete would crumble, the plastic would fragment. And if the tectonic cycles turn, if the continents lift up as they did in the time of Rodinia, or if the ice returns to scour the north, our entire epoch could be wiped away. Imagine a geologist 100 million years from now. They might look at the rock record and see the layers of the Jurassic rich with dinosaur bones. They might see the layers of the Eocene, rich with mammals. And then, above that, they might find a strange, thin line, a chemical anomaly, a spike in carbon, a trace of strange metals, and then, nothing. Our entire history, our wars, our art, our struggles, compressed into a layer of sediment no thicker than a sheet of paper. Or perhaps, if the erosion is deep enough, we will be gone entirely. We might become the next unconformity. Future intelligences might put their hands on a cliff face, touching the rock of the Pleistocene and the rock of the far future, wondering what happened in the gap between them, wondering if anything existed in that lost time. This thought is not meant to induce despair. It is meant to induce perspective. It reminds us that we are not the masters of this stone. We are guests. We are a brief, vibrant, and fragile layer of biology, clinging to the surface of a machine that operates on a timescale we can barely comprehend. We are part of the cycle. We are the sediment of the future. And as we return to the place where our journey began, to the bottom of the canyon, the line in the stone takes on a new meaning. It is no longer just a mystery of the past. It is a mirror of our own fragility. Let us go back down. Let us descend one last time into the shadowed depths of the Grand Canyon, to the quiet edge of the Colorado River. Let us stand once more before that cliff face in Blacktail Canyon. At the beginning of this journey, we placed our hand on the line. We felt the cold, hard reality of the Great Unconformity, and we felt confusion. We felt the vertigo of a missing billion years. But now, when we place our hand on that seam, the feeling is different. We are no longer touching a crime scene. We are touching a scar, and scars are the proof of healing. The rock below your thumb, the ancient Vishnu schist, represents the world that was. It is the monument to the boring billion, the stagnant, sulphurous, slime-covered world that was trapped in a loop of endless stability. It is the tombstone of a planet that was asleep. The rock above your thumb, the Tapeates sandstone, represents the world that is. It is the monument to the explosion of life, the arrival of eyes and shells and minds. It is the foundation of the noisy, vibrant world we live in, and the line itself, the void between your fingers. It is no longer empty space. It is filled with meaning. That thin, invisible boundary is the physical memory of the ice. It is the shadow of the glaciers that ground the old world into dust. It is the ghost of the chemical fire that fertilized the oceans. When you touch that line, you are touching the moment the Earth woke up. It is a profound realization. If the rock record were complete, if those missing pages were still there, we would likely not be here to read them. If the continents had not been lifted, if the ice had not scoured them, if the nutrients had remained locked in the stone, the slime might still rule. The gap is not an error. The gap is the bridge. We stand on this line, small and fragile, made of the very calcium and phosphate that was released by this destruction. We are the children of the gap. The stone is cold under our hand. The river flows by, continuing its endless work of erosion, continuing the cycle. And as we look at the line one last time, the fear of the void fades. It is replaced by gratitude. We understand now that the silence was necessary. The planet had to stop speaking the language of the old world so it could learn to speak the language of life. Our investigation is complete. We came looking for a missing billion years. We came looking for a crime scene, a theft of history. We found instead a story of transformation. The Great Unconformity is not a flaw in the record. It is the most important sentence the Earth has ever written, precisely because it was written in negative space. It teaches us a lesson that is difficult for the human mind to accept. We want history to be a solid, unbroken chain. We want to believe that every moment is recorded, that every life leaves a mark. But the Earth teaches us that forgetfulness is a virtue. If the planet remembered everything, if it never eroded its mountains, never scoured its continents, never recycled its crust, it would be a dead world, a stagnant, locked vault of nutrients, trapped in a forever of slime. It was the erasing that allowed the writing to begin again. It was the silence that allowed the music to start. We are the echo of that silence, the complexity of our bodies, the calcium in our bones, the phosphorus in our minds. We are built from the dust of the missing pages. We are the children of the gap. So when you think of the deep past, do not fear the void. Do not fear the empty spaces in the rock where the story seems to stop. Those spaces are not empty. They are full of potential. They are the deep breaths the planet takes before it speaks a new word. The Earth is old. It is patient. It has seen mountains rise and fall like waves on the ocean. It has seen worlds freeze and burn. And through it all, it keeps its own time, indifferent to our clocks, indifferent to our need for continuity. We are living in a brief, loud, and brilliant chapter. We are writing our own lines in the sediment, and one day the page will turn, the cycle will continue. But for now, the ground is solid, the air is breathable, the story is still being told. As you lie here, suspended in your own quiet moment of time, remember the line in the canyon. Remember the billion years of silence that lie beneath you, supporting you, holding you up. Let go of the need to know everything. Let go of the need to fill every gap. There is peace in the mystery. There is comfort in the deep, unrecorded dark. The earth is resting, and now so can you. Good night.